Nigeria has qualified to be a failed state. We have met the 2 or 3 biggest characteristics of a failed state.
The prediction some years ago that Nigeria would become a failed state has actually come to pass.
If we asked you to name a failed state, you'd probably point at Haiti, Somalia, or more recently Libya and Sudan, countries shaped by conflict. But what if we told you that one of Africa's most vibrant, most populous nations, a recognized leader on the continent and a beacon of ambition, is quietly, alarmingly, showing all the symptoms of a failing state? Yes, we're talking about Nigeria. At first glance, the idea of Nigeria being a failing state seems silly. What with Nigeria having almost 240 million people, with a dynamic economy and a rich cultural heritage, a land of unparalleled human spirit and entrepreneurial drive, energetic and creative people who have taken global music and entertainment to new heights, with tech companies clearing billions of dollars globally and globally recognized billionaires now akin to celebrities. Yet, behind the headlines of economic growth and cultural vibrancy, a darker narrative unfolds. A relentless and systemic decay pushing this West African giant to the brink of collapse. Today, we peel back the layers to ask a critical, uncomfortable question. Is Nigeria a failed state? And why does the world seem to be looking away? What is a failed state? A failed state isn't just a nation in crisis. It's one where the government has fundamentally lost control over its territory, its ability to provide basic security, and its essential public services. It's a place where central authority has crumbled, giving way to widespread conflict, severe poverty, and entrenched corruption. Nigeria, tragically, is now exhibiting these symptoms with chilling clarity. Let's start with the obvious. Conflict.
Number 1 is when you're no longer in charge of your territory. Today, we are among the top terrorized countries of the world. We are among the top kidnapping countries of the world. Banditry, criminality, bandits have taken over some parts of this country.
The sheer scale of Nigeria's security crisis is breathtaking. It's not one war but many, fought on multiple fronts. There's the Northwest, a region where organized gangs and bandits have elevated criminality to an unprecedented level. These groups, often possessing military-grade equipment from looted army caches or illicit cross-border networks, unleash terror on rural communities. They raid and loot villages, steal cattle, and engage in mass kidnappings for ransom. In a region home to 60 million people, an astonishing 8 out of 10 residents view banditry as their greatest threat. These highly mobile, elusive groups have no political agenda beyond extortion, but their actions have displaced over 500,000 people, led to mass kidnappings, and pushed the annual death toll into the thousands. The government's anemic response has left these areas in profound disarray. Going clockwise, in the northeast, we encounter the chilling legacy of Boko Haram, a jihadist group that emerged in 2009 with a ruthless ambition to dismantle the Nigerian government and replace it with its own extremist interpretation of Sharia law. Their notoriety stems from unspeakable acts of violence against civilians, mass kidnappings, and a fighting force that numbers in the tens of thousands. This insurgency has displaced over 2 million people and claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, not just through direct combat, but also through the devastating ripple effects of famine and disease. But the horror in the northeast doesn't end there. From Boko Haram's shadows emerged ISWAP, the Islamic State West Africa province. This splinter group, more sophisticated and strategically adept, has expanded its network across the Sahel. ISWAP now operates with chilling efficiency, using drones for bomb drops and executing complex night attacks on military outposts. They're not just fighting the Nigerian army, they've even engaged in brutal internal battles with Boko Haram, showcasing their growing dominance and ambition to carve out a caliphate in the region. Recent surges in their attacks, including overrunning entire military battalions and seizing substantial equipment, demonstrate their alarming capability. And disturbingly, an entirely new Islamic State-affiliated faction has surfaced in the northwest, establishing illicit smuggling routes to bolster ISWAP, signaling a metastasizing threat. We arrive at the Middle Belt, a vast expanse in central Nigeria, ravaged for decades by a conflict between farming communities and nomadic herding groups. Though often framed through a religious lens, this conflict is fundamentally driven by dwindling arable land, exacerbated by climate change, drought, and desertification. As populations grow and resources shrink, farmers and herders clash over land, often fueled by the easy availability of black market weapons. Thousands have died, and massacres are shockingly common, with dozens of civilians lost in recent outbreaks. This isn't just a localized dispute, it's a symptom of deeper environmental and demographic pressures. Further downwards, the threats transform but remain equally devastating. In the southeast, the indigenous people of Biafra, or IPOB, and its paramilitary wing, the Eastern Security Network, have been locked in a bitter struggle against the Nigerian government for over 4 years. This separatist movement taps into historical grievances, bringing up the vestige of secession during the Nigerian Civil War of the late 1960s. Though they are not exactly a terrorist group, and while difficult to quantify the precise death toll, skirmishes and raids are constant, creating an unstable environment that criminal elements are starting to exploit. Failed government. These security crises are not isolated phenomena. They are symptoms of a deeper, more insidious disease, systemic decay rooted in pervasive corruption and profound governance failures. Corruption in Nigeria is not merely a problem, it is a way of life infecting every level and branch of government. From inflated contract costs and ghost worker schemes to outright embezzlement, public funds intended for vital services are routinely siphoned off.
Can you tell us the figure again?
14,460,000,000.
Is it for houses, for cars, or for jewelry?
No, for jewelry.
Imagine the impact when money meant to equip soldiers, build schools, or stock hospitals disappears into private pockets. Transparency International consistently ranks Nigeria among the most corrupt nations, a stark indicator of the crippling effect this has on development and the state's ability to function. PwC estimates that corruption could cost Nigeria almost 40% of its GDP by 2030 if unchecked. Poor state of the military. This corruption directly paralyzes the military. Troops are underpaid, under-equipped, and their logistical chains are often non-existent. The very funds meant to bolster their capabilities are diverted, leaving them vulnerable and demoralized. Beyond financial malfeasance, there are chilling reports of human rights abuses by Nigerian forces. These acts erode public trust, making it impossible for the military to gain the cooperation of the very communities they are meant to protect. When the supposed protectors are seen as little better than the aggressors, the state's legitimacy crumbles. Corrupt political elite.
The latest ranking released by Transparency International shows that Nigeria has dropped 3 places and scored lower in number of points than in its previous year's record. This indicates that corruption is perceived to have worsened in the country within the last 1 year.
The failure of governance extends to the political leadership itself. Nigeria's political elites seem more adept at maintaining power through patronage networks and vote buying than at addressing the nation's existential threats. Accountability is a rare commodity, and leaders often prioritize the well-being of their support bases in major cities like Lagos and Abuja, effectively abandoning vast rural areas to the mercy of insurgents and bandits. The democratic space, though theoretically open since 1999, has been dominated by a political class that consistently undermines democratic principles, further alienating the populace and fueling widespread cynicism. The lack of political will to implement sweeping reforms, to tackle deeply entrenched corruption, or to genuinely address the root causes of insecurity speaks volumes about a system that protects its own at the expense of its people. Failing economy. The human cost of this multi-layered crisis is immeasurable. Economically, Nigeria is struggling under the weight of widespread poverty, with 56% of its population, nearly 130 million people, living below the national poverty line. Food insecurity is rampant, inflation soars, and economic opportunities are scarce, particularly for the vast youth population. 2/3 of Nigerians are under 25, facing a bleak future of high unemployment, which creates a fertile recruitment ground for various armed groups. The relentless insecurity also deters foreign investment, further strangling economic growth and perpetuating a vicious cycle of poverty and violence. Socially, the breakdown is equally profound. Millions are internally displaced, living in precarious camps where basic necessities are scarce. Healthcare and education systems are crumbling in affected regions, with schools frequently targeted by insurgents. Let's round things up. The constant threat of violence, coupled with a lack of access to justice, leaves communities traumatized and without hope. The pervasive inequality ensures that even when progress is quantified on average, it bypasses tens of millions of people for whom life is only getting worse. Nigeria's military is undeniably overstretched. With 230,000 active troops, they are simply too few to effectively combat myriad, asymmetric threats across such a vast territory. Logistical nightmares plague deployments, limiting counteroffensives and access to crucial heavy weaponry or air support. They are often outmaneuvered by agile insurgent groups and lack the intelligence capabilities to track them effectively. And what's the world doing about this, and the international community? Their response has been cautious, almost hesitant. Western powers are reluctant to provide substantial military aid, fearing it will disappear into the same corrupt channels that have weakened Nigeria's institutions. Regional cooperation, though vital, is complex, often hampered by historical mistrust and Nigeria's own past as a safe haven for cross-border insurgencies. While Russia and China have offered some support, hardware, and technical expertise, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the systemic overhaul Nigeria desperately needs. The international focus tends to be on humanitarian aid, which, while crucial for immediate relief, fails to address the deep-seated governance and corruption issues that fuel the crisis. It's a band-aid solution when the patient needs life-saving surgery. What we've learned so far. So, is Nigeria a failed state? While it might not yet fit the textbook definition of total collapse like Somalia, the evidence suggests it is certainly a failing state, rapidly approaching that precipice. It faces an unprecedented convergence of widespread, escalating insurgencies, compounded by endemic corruption that cripples its government and military, and a pervasive failure of leadership to genuinely address its people's suffering. The tragic reality is that the solutions required are sweeping and profound: a radical commitment to transparency and accountability, a determined effort to reform and professionalize the military, and a political will to prioritize the well-being of all citizens, not just the elite. But with deeply entrenched interests benefiting from the status quo, and an international community seemingly unwilling or unable to provide decisive, coordinated support for systemic change, the path ahead for Nigeria appears fraught with even greater peril. The world can no longer afford to ignore the unseen cracks in Africa's giant, for the ripple effects of Nigeria's decline would be felt far beyond its borders. The question is no longer if Nigeria is failing, but how quickly it can pull back from the brink and whether anyone is truly listening.